Then we went to the would-be.
Sorry?
We went to the
Did you share it there with me?
no.
Oh, my husband was at the room. I'm just letting you know we can actually go live now on YouTube. Okay. It's almost
Good evening. Thank you everyone for coming along to meeting of the member development group. Glad to see not quite everyone here yet. I'm not going to. Well, do we have any apologies for absence?
no apology.
Okay. Hopefully the other members will be along very shortly then. Next item we have then we'll move on to the minutes of the previous meeting. People happy with the minutes of the meeting? Yes. Okay. Before we agree those then, thank you. Does anyone have any declarations of interest? Okay, no. Okay, thank you very much. So we'll move on to item 4, which is a refresh of the Be a Councillor Guide. Next elections. Okay, so we have a number of recommendations and some proposed changes because I've come a look through the existing units. It's quite a bit out of date by now. We have one chief executive behind, certainly. Also sort of changes. Charlotte, perhaps a little bit more.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, everybody. So really just a discussion topic. I've been through the Be a Councillor Guide and there's a list in the report there of things that I feel need updating. And it's really just a case of, do you agree with those updates? Is there anything else that you would like to update? I believe I've included towards the end just some discussion points. Oh no, not this one. Come on. So what we've got is the Be a Councillor Guide in need of updating. If you've got any more suggestions about things that we can include, we'd be happy to take those on board. As well as the guide which we publish, we also do some events. Kath goes out and has a community meeting with prospective councillors that want to come along. We did 2 or 3 of those across the borough, and it's proposed that we would continue to do those, and also a social media campaign to raise awareness of the guide and the fact that their positions will become available. I'm happy to open it out, Chairman, to any comments the group might have.
That's excellent. Thank you very much. I'm glad you're using social media for that. It'd be wonderful. Do some kind of YouTube videos or something like that. I feel some clips, information for you to have a look at. Councillor Bob.
Thank you, Joe. You say Kath goes out and meets with prospective councillors. Is that publicised?
Yes, it was publicised on social media and through town and parish councils when we did it 4 years ago. 4 years is a long time and lots happened.
Oh,
We did, let me think, we did one in the east and the west and one in West Bridgeford, not in West Bridgeford. No, we did east and west. Something covered in the middle. We did a third one, maybe it was Cochrane, but there was something in the middle. So we did a couple of just evening events, invited people to come along. It was the first time that we'd done it, so it may not have been hugely well publicised. But I seem to remember that and I'm going to say it did go to, I think that's where it was, but we had an awful lot of people come along to that one, as you would expect, given the nature of the community and the developments going on there.
can I just say, I think it would be a very good idea if you push that out to the existing councillors to publicise within their wards and areas. Because I think it's a very good idea.
Yeah, my plan this year would be to have some of you come along and talk about your experiences. So as well as doing what we did last time, we're also developing what we've done to make it more interactive, to have more information. So last time it was a bit of a toe in water. Do people become, yes, people came, so now we can actually put some effort into making it more.
That would have been the next one.
Thank you. And Councillor Mason.
Thank you. I don't remember, I'm not saying for definite, I don't remember Tollerton doing anything, parish council doing anything like that. I suppose it was left to the parish council to decide whether they wanted to do it or not, perhaps that was it, but I certainly don't remember seeing anything about that.
It wasn't something that happened in a lot of places. I think we had 2 or 3 events where people would come together.
I think as well, because the parish forum is very good. I think it's very interesting and a lot is learnt and said. Unfortunately, Tollerton Parish Council don't attend, partly because they work and it's always during the day. So perhaps, you know, they could be encouraged a bit more, perhaps, to get the word out. But I suppose I'm a bit like Councillor Cumberland. I can't quite remember it actually happening. I have years ago remember something like that, but I don't remember that. Anyway, thank you. I think it's a good idea.
I ask for the other councillors who are in parish areas, is that a common thing for being pushed out with the parish councils, the town councils, and in West Bridgford we've mentioned it through the local area forum before, but there are many community groups groups within West Bridgford that don't cover this at all. They don't consider it to be in their remit. Maybe they should.
I don't think there's anything big come through the town where I'm from being at the town council of kind of a campaign or events there for people to go meet kind of coloured councillors and stuff like that. I think it's more that they put out on the website. If you want to become a councillor, please contact the town clerk. And I think that's as far as it goes. There isn't anything more, but I think if there was kind of in and places like that, kind of central points around the borough for an event that can go and meet councillors from all levels that come sit thing, because I wasn't aware before I stood 4 years ago that kind of events were happening.
Yeah, in Ruddington on the the village centre partnership, they have that every month they have on the first Saturday of the month they have a well, the village centre partnership, obviously the mob, and the parish council put up a like a little bit of a tent type thing there, or not a marquee, but you know what I mean. Matt Barney, myself, Councillor Barney, and myself, we've asked if we can have a little or share it with them, basically. That's what we're going to be doing from here on in. They think it's a good idea. So you've got the parish council and the borough council and the county council together with them, so we're going to drag Reg down there as well. But that's how we're sort of getting involved with people within the village. Not loud enough, so
Sorry, not sorry. Yeah, that's good. It's useful to know. And you know, obviously something that we can all, I think, encourage all the councillors to help promote being a councillor, how to be a councillor, so people out there can learn more about. Bringing it back to the guide here, we've got quite a few proposed updates that the officers have given us into about the new chief executive. Obviously, some one of the bits of content, comment related to Brexit, comments about webcast meetings, the induction program, and allowance figures, and there's some other in there bits in there as well, including the updated photographs. Are there any other additions or changes that councillors feel may be needed to councillors?
Thank you, Jim. I can't recall that it's some time since I've read this document. if there's actually something in there that encourages people to come along to a full council meeting so they can actually see what goes off in full council. If there's not, I think that would be, if it's not in there, I think that would be quite good so they know what they're letting themselves in for. And also the quotes from current councillors, I presume we're going to mix that up a little bit and get a lot of the newer councillors to sort of say what they've experienced in the previous years.
Very much depends when I send the email out saying, please can you contribute, very much depends who comes back. So anything you can do to encourage your counterparts to get back to me is great. The more people we have, the better the quality of the document. But certainly I take your point about watching full council meetings. Of course, we can do it on YouTube these days as opposed to coming in person. But we'll make sure it's mentioned.
Can't say I've noticed an awful lot of thumbs up and likes so far from council meetings on any of the YouTube videos. Councillor Gray.
Well, just on that, I wonder if it would be possible to come up with a highlight reel of exciting things that may have happened in council meetings. So rather than say, come and watch this 3-hour long, if we can think back to some of the more interesting, should we say, rather than explosive, exchanges that there have been, examples of scrutiny, for example, that have been excellent in recent times and where we've seen more change happen. Just perhaps a one of the perhaps less exciting scrutiny.
Then they might think it's as exciting as the whole time.
Absolutely.
Which of course it is exciting all the time.
Just have one other point as well as a revision. Notice on the list of parties, UKIP's listed there. So I think the change in poll will make that
Yes, I did wonder about that myself. There was a bit under 4.3, and Councillor Phillips maybe highlighted this. We'll get some of the newer councillors involved about the section on diversity and encouraging councillors from a wide range of backgrounds and experiences to become members and represent the community. I think that's a really, really good idea because we are lacking that basic feel. Good section. What I wish I'd known 4 years ago. So that could put some interesting responses up there. And if you look at 4.5, we mentioned that the outreach, which we'll discuss in some detail, and the social media. Councillor Williams.
I just wanted to talk about the 4.3 on diversity. And of course, often when we think about diversity being ethnicity and that thing, that kind of a background. But of course, we don't, to my knowledge, and forgiving councillors and that, there isn't kind of like disability kind of representation on the council and that type of thing. So I don't know if there's something that in that section could go with disability to kind of somebody who has got disabilities to be encouraged and to show how the council could be adapted, being a councillor and coming to meetings for their needs as well, to encourage people from that side of the community, because again, we can't have, to my mind, anybody who is kind of like you see in a wheelchair, for instance, or something like that, that are coming into the chamber in a wheelchair and taking part in a meeting that there's if there's something like that as well.
Yes, that's very true. Something about accessibility would be useful. Councillor Mason.
Thank you. I know there's been a couple of councils, me included, that was in a wheelchair for a considerable amount of time, and for me, it was an eye opener. I couldn't open that door because I couldn't zap the thing to unlock it. I turned around quick enough to open the door, and that was quite difficult. And the same for the lift. The way to do it is to reverse it. If you're going forward, you go So there was all sorts of things that came home to me, really, when that happened, and I would just fairly short, because we don't want it too long endless, but just to, I know Councillor Bailey, she was in, although I think her husband. But there are certain difficulties sometimes in pressing one button, that you can talk when it's too far away, things like that, but you find out it's a good test. So I think it is fairly good.
Right, is there any other comments or thoughts either on the document or in general that we would like to bring forward at this point? Councillors?
I think we need to mention that we seem to be heading more towards meetings during the day. So there's no point in encouraging somebody who's maybe in a full-time job who thinks everything's going to be in the evening, and then they get appointed to planning and it's during the day and can't turn up. So I think that's important that more and more meetings are happening during the day.
Yeah, though I think probably worth adding that we can actually choose to move those meetings to make sure that councillors can attend. They don't have to be absolutely fixed points. We found we have people who have childcare, for example, who are going to certain times. Councillor Cobble.
Thank you. Whilst you're talking about that sort of thing, it just occurred to me that perhaps we should also be saying that need to be relatively IT literate because we're paperlike and agendas, etc., are sent electronically.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that we do provide assistance as well. We've got IT experts who can help people out, not just at the start of the term, but also throughout the term as well. Any others? Councillor Greg?
Just a quick general comment, really. I think obviously we're editing the guide for 2022, but I was handed the last bit of the guide by Alistair, and you know, he encouraged me to start using this. So it is actually a very good document. Some may argue the opposite. It was. So just want to say thank you. We're going to take previously and we're working on me.
Okay, right, so I think we'll move to the recommendations then. So we've got the recommendation there. Discuss the proposed changes contained in 4.1, additional ideas. Discuss the proposed new content, 4.3, which we have done, and the ideas that we bring. Discuss the supporting activities, 4.5, and the initial ideas, and give officers a clear mandate to move forward with the 2022 Be Councillor Guide, associated activities to promote the role of councillor in advance of the May 2023 Borough, Town, Parish elections. Goes to see all in favour of the recommendations, please show. Thank you very much. Okay. Move on now to the councillors' training update.
Thank you very much. So if you remember back to last July, full council, we approved the new learning and development policy for councillors, which has been through this group the previous year. Training has had its ups and downs in this cycle. So it started off incredibly fiercely with a very, very intensive induction program. Training after that was very well attended and then started to tail off. Things got a little bit sticky. Then COVID hit. And of course, we took training off the programme. We had more than enough to deal with. serving your communities and making sure that they were okay. Started to roll out a little bit more training now over the last months. Most things have been well attended. E-learning is continuing to be a bit of a sticking point. So I'll come to that in a bit more detail later on. But what you have here is what we said we would do, what we committed to do in the learning development policy, which was bring to member development and update on training each time we met. Now, the document that you've got here in front of you, it gives you an idea of how many councillors or percentage of councillors who have completed each of the different training modules that we have. So that is in paragraph 4.7. Appendix 1. Okay. Yes, Appendix 1 didn't quite work out the way I was expecting it to. So just to make things a little bit more easy. Hopefully this document, yes, it's on paper because I've done it today and there wasn't time to send it to you in advance so that you could have it on your electronic devices. So I thought it was only fair that I printed it out if I was going to refer to it. So hopefully that provides you with a little, oh yes. Do we have any spares? So this document actually provides a hopefully an easier to understand breakdown of the percentage of councillors who have done mandatory, essential and desirable training modules, whether those are face-to-face or on the e-learning platform. So again, something for us to discuss. So as we go through this report, there are questions at each point. So paragraph 4.8, member development group is asked to consider what actions can be taken to encourage attendance and completion, whether any action should be taken for repeated non-engagement in training. Points. One other thing that I wanted to bring to your attention was the finding of the corporate governance audit, which went to governance scrutiny group last November, so just before Christmas. So they looked at, amongst other things, training for mandatory aspects. So this is where our constitution says you have to be trained before you can sit on this committee, and that applies to planning, licensing and the standards committee, as well as employment appeals and interviewing committee. Now, employment appeals and interviewing don't meet very often, so the training does tend to be as and when. As far as standards and licensing goes, you tend to only go on those training courses if you are on the committee or if you're likely to be stood up as a stand-in. Planning, to my mind, is something that all councillors should be required to go on, whether you're on the committee or not. Not only do we have a big committee and therefore we have people standing in, but of course you will comment on any applications in your ward. So the auditors picked up on some members not having had the necessary training to sit on their groups. Now, since November, we have had an extra planning training event, which was very well attended, 27 councillors on that one, which means that only one councillor nominated to the committee has still not received the mandatory training. Unfortunately, they were not well at the time and could not attend. But we have booked in a one-to-one training session that will be happening in the next couple of weeks that will resolve that issue. So I'm confident that everybody who needs to have planning training will have had it. We have licensing training booked for 2022. If you remember, we unfortunately lost our licensing officer just before Christmas. And so that's taken us a little while to make sure that we can get somebody in to do that for us. And a skills audit will take place for governance scrutiny group members after annual council when we have a new committee membership, just to check that we have the right skills in that particular committee, given their financial and audit requirements that they have. So any extra training that they need will go in place, and that's in line with new Treasury Management Code requirements. So at 4.15, just asking whether or not there's any further action to take after that corporate governance audit. And then in paragraph 4.19, just some general questions for you to consider. What does good engagement in training look like? think it would be unrealistic if we expected 100% to be in every single one of those boxes. But what is good engagement? How many people do we want to see turning up? What percentages of essential training should we be aiming for? What can be done to increase engagement, especially in mandatory and essential areas? Is it necessary to introduce sanctions? So some councils hold back a certain amount of the councillor's allowance or even take it back if training is not taken up. And most importantly, where we're sat at the moment, coming up to the 4th year of your cycle, what can we do now to improve training engagement post 2023 and the election and subsequent induction of any new councillors we may have? There's quite a lot there for you to kind of get your head around and get your teeth into. I'm open to any and all suggestions.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, thinking caps on, folks.
We had I think Charlotte will agree, very good scrutiny training session last week. And we chose to have it online because we felt that by doing that, it was a bit of a test the water, but we thought that by doing that, we might get more engagement because people haven't travelling time from home, and I don't know, in some ways maybe they're not so exposed. And it certainly proved that we got some very good numbers. Having said that, it was, I'm hoping this is the way it's going to go, it was a bit of a teaser session. And there are now things that we need to follow up on, which we may do face to face. I don't know whether we'll do that or not. But I haven't, whilst that was going on, I was thinking to myself, how do we engage people more? And I think the word training was lost. I know that I've heard some councillors say, I don't need training. I know what I'm doing. I've been a councillor for however long. And I thought it might be an idea if we had one or two, or if we want them, networking sessions where we network with all councillors and officers, not all officers obviously, because we couldn't possibly take them out of their roles or whatever, but and officers. So we have a networking session, a bit like the town and parish forum maybe. And maybe we could have a couple of breakout sessions, which in fact are training sessions. So that councillors who are there would have done some of the training. And then there'd be a follow-on from that. It's just a thought, which I'm rolling out there. If you look at this, I think the online stuff, I don't know how you are, but I find trying to do things like that online, I lose the will to live. And I don't necessarily think that works. I think maybe a brief summary of something, that's fine, but actually trying to do a course online, I think is a bit much. And the other thing is, you tend to be doing it, at the end of the day, you've been to work, and you're tired, and you think, oh no, not looking at this dark screen again. So I'm not sure about that. So that's my idea.
Thank you. Councillor Mason.
Thank you. Yes, I remember many years ago with East Midlands councils when we did the charter. And then I was for the East Midlands, I was the chairman of that for a long time. And one of the things was that a lot of, but many councils actually found successful was what Councillor Candlelack said. They called it a cafe, and they had some teas and coffees and a few stickers and things, some biscuits and some and asked them to come in, maybe on the way after work, had it like a drop-in centre. And it was very successful. I remember Broxton did it, and they had a big response. And this idea of councillors, it worked quite well. I don't like training, I don't like the word, and I think updates and updates don't help, but just new ideas, things it's always good, but anything that's interactive. And I remember one planning one, and there was one particular one that I remember, and that was to do with full council and motions and things, and there was bits of paper. And actually, it was make it a bit more fun, rather than just have a screen that we all look at and read. And I'm afraid that's what tends to be when it comes to looking on your computer. That's what it is. It's like looking at just screen after screen, and I find that I don't personally find it. And I remember that there was a survey done, and it was a very low percentage that welcomed it. They would do it if there was no other way, but they didn't exactly welcome it at the time. I know they perhaps were different councillors then, but I think it's still similar animals to what we are now. So yes, and this is called member development, isn't it? So I think the word could be development, anything but training, updating, because a lot of the licensing, the actual training part is updating, and all sorts of other things, whether it's again about things that are happening actually in the East Midlands or the West Midlands, and that is it's all updating us, isn't it? So I think that would perhaps be helpful as well, just to make it more interactive, because that's what will get people here, that they something that they feel they need to know, rather than just be taught. So yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. First up is just a kind of a question, just a clarification on the table 4.7, where it says about percentage of required councillors. I take with potentially with like the mandatory ones, is that just of how many people are on the planning? It's 9% of the planning members, or is it 9% of everybody? And the same with licensing, and so kind of what those actual numbers reiterate. So if it is a different, not the full 44, yeah, it's to have kind of actually what that number is, or how many there is. And I kind of can see with what's being said of different people learn differently, take information on board. Some people prefer to have it in a book. Some people, like I said, I prefer to do an e-learning course because I have to do it through my work, sit in front of the computer and do it. Like when I started my work, I had to sit in front of it for 2 days doing e-learning stuff from all kinds of different things. But I can see where people kind of like it with somebody giving them a presentation, sitting in front of them. So I think we do have to have an open mind on the range of people's backgrounds and how they like to learn and absorb information. I can see where the point of training could be seen as a harsh word, so maybe development and sort of kind of depending on what the course is. But of course, with some of the essential ones, they're from the provider and it's their title that they've put. And of course, in order to know when you're going online to see what the course is called, you've got to with what they've called it. But I think, yeah, I think that's kind of everything. I think one point that's been asked is a way around the mandatory ones and councillors on how to encourage people, and if you have to look down the route of taking some kind of like allowance off them. Of course, if a councillor doesn't do the training, isn't willing to do the training, do you then say, well, you can't go on the committee? But then, of course, it goes to people that are willing to do the training, then get put on everything, because that, by definition, is that they've done the training. So potentially, if you have to go down that route, so actually with necessarily with planning, but of course, what that amount is always up for discussion, and would always be when you start hurting people's pocket and stuff. Can be a sticky night. But I do think once I had to sort of on governance, and that week we had some training to do with an area of governance, and it was actually on the agenda, and that was really useful because of it being, I think the governance was on the Thursday and the training was on the Tuesday. Because it was so fresh in our minds, it really helped with the meeting. So maybe when it comes to like a planning meeting, that if there was a training like that week or within a certain period, but the same with licensing, because licensing doesn't happen all the time in the calendar, that if there was like a training just beforehand for people on the committee or for anybody, it might encourage people to then actually go and do that training for that committee coming in.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. So I think we'll come back to you about this. But that might not be possible for everything. But I think there is a point of people seeing the relevance, councillors seeing the relevance and understanding, you know, I'm on this committee or I'm doing this, what training is relevant to this. And if people are not seeing that, then that's what we do.
Councillor Williams, to answer your point about the figures in paragraph 4.7, so the mandatory ones are the ones where you're required by the Constitution to go on the training before you can sit on the committee. So that is 90% of the total numbers of the planning committee members, rather than all councillors. So the essential ones are taken from 44 councillors being the 100% mark, but the mandatory ones are just the numbers on those committees. And just one point about e-learning before, if that's okay, Chairman. So the reason that we brought in e-learning, obviously staff officers upstairs in the offices, we do e-learning all the time. We also do face-to-face training. We have a variety of different ways of doing things. But the e-learning was brought in for both officers and then later the councillors for those topics where it lends itself to it. It might not be very interactive, it might be quite information based, it's about getting something across, but it's also probably something that requires us to say, actually, everybody has done that. GDPR is a good example. We need to demonstrate that everybody has done that. The e-learning allows us to do that in a way that's a lot simpler than an attendance sheet or something like that. Now, when GDPR first came out, all councillors were required to attend a training session. There were 2 of them and they lasted 2 hours each. Now the GDPR modules take about 45 minutes for all 3 of them. You can do them in your own time, at home in the comfort of your own home, whenever you choose to do them. And that is why we brought e-learning in, because it was to make training, learning in certain subject areas more accessible and easier for councillors. Because we were seeing a tail off in the number of councillors who were willing to travel, sit in this room, listen to a training session and then go home again. So it is important that there's a balance there. If we have to deliver all of those training modules face to face and you have to come to them, we're going to be spending an awful lot of time sat in this room training. So we were trying to accomplish a balance between stuff that, you know, did lend itself to being done online, and then stuff that could be more interactive, more interesting, and be done in person.
Yeah, Councillor Phillips, then Councillor Shaw.
Thank you. Just on the e-learning, I eventually got around to doing some e-learning, and I completed the course, and then I wasn't able to actually finish that particular session that I'd done. I think I contacted yourself and said, you know, you're saying I haven't done it when I have. I think you said it was an external people sort of updates everything, and they've been told, but I think, right, that I'm still down as not completing that particular one. And also, I think we said a few years ago that we would have one password. Instead, we've got a password to get onto the Worcester Council system, but a different password and username for planning. We've got totally different for the e-learning. I can't remember what my e-learning one is. It's bad enough trying to remember one, but one three. So we could help ourselves by making it a lot easier. We go in with one password and then we access everything.
Just to come back on that point, so single sign-on for e-learning is absolutely a possibility. There is a way of doing that. There isn't planning online, so don't get too excited. But we can at least resolve this one. It's just a matter of prioritising time to make that happen. But it is possible, and I'm hoping that at some point this year we'll have time to sort that out for you.
Okay, so, sorry. Okay, Councillor Shaw, then Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. As a very new councillor, 3 years ago, obviously, that first 6 weeks were a bit frantic. We were here 2 nights a week, basically doing the induction training. And then the first lockdown came, and I was basically stuck in the house for 10 to 12 weeks. So I actually did quite a lot of the e-learning then. I only did the ones that were I felt I needed, so a lot of them the things that I've done as part of my job anyway, so I didn't think I needed to do them. One of the things that worries me looking at this list, as you know, I'm a member of the government scrutiny group. And there are 2 members of that scrutiny group that haven't done any of the training, and that worries me. You know, they're coming along, they're quizzing the internal auditor, the auditors, and there's absolutely nothing on paper to show that they have a clue what they're talking about, basically. I don't want, I'm not going to say that the officers shouldn't allow these people to be on these committees example of the training, but I think it's the group leaders that should be saying to somebody, if you want to be on that committee, then you've got to do with this code. It's a bit unusual, a little bit different for we in 3 independents, because there's only 3 of us. And when we discovered what committees were being offered, we then sat down between the 3 of us and decided which committees of those the 3 of us wanted to do. So to a certain extent, it was a bit of being specialists and picking out, you know, my background is finance, so government scrutiny was the obvious one for me to be on. Carrie's a real expert on planning, so I could obviously achieve on planning. So on, we did that with the board, basically. But it does concern me that there are people on important committees that have not done any training whatsoever. And I can't understand why they're allowed to be on that committee if they haven't trained. I'm not talking about training this year, I'm talking about training over the last 3 years, not one single code, one person, not done one single code. I think that's appalling. Whatever you call it, it's appalling.
Yeah, indeed, that's why the auditors have commented on that particular group. That is something that I think perhaps group leaders, yes, but also the chair of that committee as well needs to say, look, you will be taking this seriously, and there is training that is needed for this group. Perhaps for all the groups where we've got particular training, maybe that's something that the chair of those groups needs to be pushing out to the members of the group and saying, look, you need to do this, this, this. Here's a checklist. Work your way through these. Make sure you've done them all, and let me know. Councillor Conway.
Yes. I'm going back just to agree with what Councillor Phillips said. I went to try and do the e-learning right at the beginning when it first came out. I thought, right, I'll do this. Well, it's fresh in my mind, I'll do it. And I went through the process and couldn't upload it or whatever at the end, and obviously didn't get my tick in the box. And as a result, I thought, oh, forget it, I give up. So that was the end of my e-learning experience.
Councillor Gray.
So I think touching that point as well, there's with the e-learning, there seems to be, I think we've mentioned before, a few barriers to entry to actually get into it. Well, if you haven't bookmarked the page, to find it, this is how I would go to it. Email, extranet, training, and then on training it doesn't appear, so you have to click member development. Then you click the learning pool, then you go to the login with the new password. Then it says login denied, then takes you to the landing page. So,
Okay.
you know, as someone who considers himself fairly tech savvy, it seems. And I think as well, I've got suggestions, but I think perhaps if we could put the learning board onto the, I don't know, if you'd be able to put it onto the apps tab on email, because I think most of us spend a lot of our time in email when we've got an interaction. But also, perhaps Mal and I visited New Delhi this week, and they have a training PC. So they have their learning portal set up. So we have 2 PCs in the council's room upstairs, which I don't know how much use they get, but one of those was just easy to log on to the e-learning portal. That may be a good way of getting people that might pop into councils to train.
I throw past you then the idea that we've come up with, which is actually we'll have on either a couple of weekly basis or bi-monthly basis over the next year, we'll say this month is GDPR training month. You're required to undertake your e-learning. Here is the link directly to the course. It's in your email. Click on the link and it skips all of that and takes you straight to the course. Fingers crossed that will work.
That would work really well.
But yeah, that's really good. It was a good point about the training in the middle. So it was I think it was a touch screen as well, just set up. So it was the head office was just pushing the way back. So you went in there and it was there and ready to go. So we've been talking about putting it like what we can do to increase engagement as well. I think there's one bit that what's realistic to expect of councillors, and perhaps we've got different sized groups, and the groups obviously have a role in pushing forward the training, and the large groups have more options as to who can be on what group. Smaller groups, is it okay then that you divvy the work up and you say, okay, we'll do that training, another one. Is that an acceptable thing for people, or do you think that everyone should try and do as much as they could? What do we think about the idea of sanctions? Councillor Phillips and Councillor Mason.
I don't think sanctions would work, because you're not going to take money off people, and if you do, the money is not why we become councillors. And if it is, then that person might decide, what, I've had enough, and it's by-elections and everything else. Just one thing I wanted to raise is a lot of county councillors who have said, I've already done the training at county, why do I need to do it at Rushcliffe? So can their training at county not be recorded as being done at Rushcliffe, or because it seems to be a sticking?
So the same as all of you, if you, for example, Councillor Williams says, I've done these courses as part of my work, that's great. Show us your certificate, we can count you on. We've done that with Councillor Williams and with several other people. So if you've got a certificate that says you've done GDPR somewhere else, that's fine. It's still current, we can count it. So with all of the county councillors, before we publish the individual learning records in November, we asked them all specifically what training they had done since being elected the previous year to the county council. 2 came back to me. One was quite unpleasant and said that I should contact the county council. So I did that, and I got a list of all the training that they'd done with councillors. And even when you look at that list and you've been told that I don't need to do any training for Rushcliffe because I've done it with county councillors, it doesn't match up to what we're asking people to do. And even when it says planning training, when I actually asked questions, because the county council role in planning is very different, the training covers very, very different things. And unfortunately, not an awful lot of county councillors have come back and said, well, I've done it. When they have, it's not the kind of stuff that we can tick off our list. So we've counted it on the bottom of your training record. You've got other training that's been done. So we've counted it there. Can't discount any of our mandatory or essential training on that basis. I'd like to.
Councillor Mason.
Thank you. Just on that, because that's triggering something. As a school governor, I've had to go on to a separate site and do GDPR and various other things. So I could actually put that in, and I'm certified, so I've got my certificate and everything on it. So I could do that. Okay. Yes, I think that various councils at different times have tried. One is the wall of shame in a public place where people come in or what have you. You have those, what the training has been and done. Does it go on our website? It does. It says what committees we're on, doesn't it?
It says what committees you're on. At the moment, it doesn't say, it says your attendance, but that's at meetings. And there's nothing about training on the website as it stands at the moment. It's one of the things that we're looking into. However, the documentation you've got for this meeting this evening is public documentation.
Yeah.
But apart from the one that I've circulated on paper,
Yeah.
it's up to you whether you think that we need to share that publicly or with group leaders or with individual councillors.
Part of me says, well, I don't know, perhaps that's a bit like a step too far, but I'm sure that there would be some of our residents out there that would be shocked that we haven't done what we were asked or expected to do. And yes, so I think there is perhaps something that we could look at. You might get a few people not, few councillors not wanting it, but I do think there's scope for something like that. I know that some of the planning ones, if people can't get to them, they've both been. I think there was 2 that was in the evening, and it just so happened. I just get to those. It's not that I'm so busy at the moment, but I just didn't get to. I was either on holiday and had another holiday, which was quite close together. But so there are sometimes reasons for people not being able to do it. But I asked for any wording that was put up, presentation things, because that can trigger what you know and what you don't know. So I think that's important to make sure that if you have done any in-house training, that you can actually go back and have a look at something that was up on the screen, because perhaps in your mind you can't always remember it. When you see it, refreshes your memory, and I always like to ask if I can just have it. So I think that would be quite important. I have done the e-learning because I've had to as a school governor. I haven't liked it, but it has been very simple in your press, and they ask you questions at the end of it as well, and you have 3 alternatives, you know, which also is quite good. You don't have to get every single one right, but you have to get about 90%. So that would be useful.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
I did find the individual lists of what training each councillor has done, and kind of a review and reminder of the stuff that we've done, haven't done, attended. I found that really useful. I don't know how much of a task that is to do and how regularly it could be done, or if IT could kind of have something that goes into the log of what everybody's done, so you just enter it in and update it, and then if a councillor logs on to, like Councillor Gray said, of finding the link, you go in, so before you go to e-learning, it has what you've done. So then once you've done a course, potentially like yourself, could go in and just update who's attended, and then it filters it out to everybody and updates their like into online record what they've done. So it's kind of instantaneous, so then they can see. And then also with e-learning, if it then flags up that you think, well, I did that yesterday, and you look online and it's not got a date or anything, you can then go and say there and then that it's not. But otherwise, you're waiting potentially months down the line, trying to remember, did I do that one? Or because some of the titles are quite similar, some of the e-learning, so I don't know if that's something that I can build or something could get regular of just reminders and nudges in the ribs kind of thing, just as you need to do it.
I think with some of the like GDPR things, I want to go to because that's the one that you have to do refresh for anyway. But certainly, we're looking at the training here, and certainly for one group, exclusively, and for others as well, which would count as a risk that people are not doing it because it might be a bad decision to each, or decision. So maybe we should reflect that with like a RAG status, a red, amber, green status for councillors training as well. I would be in favour of that. So if they don't like to put an online thing that shows you what you've got to do, that's the RAG status with that. I would also, as I said before, I think that we should be sharing this information with the committee group chairs, deputy chairs as well, getting them to push out the message that training is required, very desirable for the members of those groups, as well as the group. Councillor Grant.
So just on that, there is, I think I've mentioned this at the previous meeting, there is a My Learning dashboard within the software that we use, but it doesn't. No, if you look through it, it's probably something fairly similar in that if that was set up with the required courses, etc., you could see how much was completed, but at the moment it's not used. So it's a feature within the software that isn't enabled or isn't set up. And I think also within the software there's a you can send notifications and messages as well through that. But again, that's not something we've seen used. So I think it's possible that we do have the capability, but it's not set up yet. Which I think setting up would be useful.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think we might need to just look into that briefly rather than just say yes, because with a lot of software practices like this, the extra features cost extra. We don't know what the implications are that thing. But I think it's a great idea. Any other comments on the stage? Okay. One thing we've not really covered is how to improve training engagement post 2023 induction. Now, Councillor Shaw, you said that it was like a huge amount of stuff thrown at you at the start, and then we went into lockdown, which was a bit different. So I think we've talked before about, do we want to have this massive thing right at the start? Some things are required, we grant that, but then do we want to spread it and make it sort of easier for people, new councillors to ease into it? And how also would we convince councillors who've been there one time that it's important and they don't know everything, but they do need to actually participate in courses? Thoughts on that as well? Other than pointing out to the ones who've been here a long time that it is actually new, you can teach an old dog new tricks.
Yeah, just to start everybody off. So the induction program that we did in 2019 was the content got very, very good responses, very high levels of satisfaction. As Councillor Shaw said, even for officers, got it done forever. So it was exhausting to come out the back of an election and straight into the induction program. Kath and I have already started talking about how we might change the structure of the induction program, potentially to over a weekend or two Saturdays running, so that you can say, right, we're going to cover everything that we would normally cover in 6 weeks in 2 days, but come and spend a day with us. Now, that programme is in the process of being drawn up, and it's on your agenda for the next meeting, which I believe we've got scheduled for May. So your views very much welcome, and then we feed into that. But it's really about, once we get over the inductors, to be honest, you're new, you're fresh, there's loads you need to know. We never have a problem engaging people in the induction process. It's after that, when there's other stuff that needs to be done, because of course, the other problem is that you don't always absorb it the first time round, or these are the essential things you need to know straight away, and these are the nice to know things as you get more involved in your role and understand a little more about how the council works and such like. So it's that kind of training. What happens for the other 3.5 years that you're against?
Yeah, so just to clear up, one I was thinking was project management, we're taking renowned green status for it. The other thing would be specific milestones to set at certain dates across that 5 years. Certainly, you must have completed this training by this date, this training by this date, this training by this date. I grant you some people are going to always run up to the deadline, but at least there will be a deadline for people to focus.
Can I just ask then, is this definite that you're looking at a weekend? Or is it like 2 Saturdays?
It's definite that we're looking at it. It could be 2 Saturdays, it could be a Wednesday and a Thursday, it could be a Saturday and a Sunday. We haven't decided on when it might be, but we're looking at condensing the induction program into 2 days.
That would normally take 6 months,
6 weeks.
6 weeks.
And as Councillor Shaw said, it was 2 or 3, sort of 2 or 3 hour sessions each week.
And then you said that, say like before 2019, you said about, well, you know, people, once they've done the job for a few months, they have questions. How will those questions be addressed if you're only doing it, if you're doing it all in 2 days? My mind boggles that I could have learned or got through enough information in 2 days rather than even 6 weeks.
I think there will always be a case. That's why we do training all the way through to 4 years. Some training we do regular planning training. So done under regulations.
But the
legislation
idea
changes, people have questions. We're not saying we're going to do 2 days of training and then not do anything else at all. We're saying we're going to condense the absolute must know from day one information into 2 days, and then have follow-up training, follow-up development opportunities and whatever updates as it goes on.
But often, for anybody that's been to a conference, you get about 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, you get after lunch sort of fatigue, don't you? And I think that 2 days is possibly not long enough, actually. But and if it was long enough, you get by the end of 2 days, you'd be. I'm not. I like the idea of the drip thing over six weeks or 2 months, however long it is, because then when they go back, they might have thought of another question that they had in the first 2 weeks. So it could be a slow build-up, because we've just said that you didn't like the fact that it all came at once.
Well, I did actually.
You
I
liked
wanted,
it? That's what you
yeah, I
wanted.
wanted to take all of them, yeah.
In 2 days.
Yeah. Although I'm not mad about that idea, looking at the weekend. No, I'm not mad about that.
2 full days. A lot of people would have to have, if it was in the week, 2 days of work.
Well, I'm part back to the point that Councillor Wilson was making earlier about it's not going to suit everybody, but I think whatever we're doing well at the moment.
I'm just worried that you do it in 2 days, and those that don't do those 2 days are left behind a bit, because you're not going to repeat it because you've already done it. So you're not giving them sort of like 2 opportunities, because often when we're doing the induction course, there's a morning and there's an afternoon or something in an evening. Well, if you've only got that opportunity to come in, I don't know, it's a long time since I've started. I always remember every election time afterwards, it works, so it doesn't. And if it obviously worked in 2019, why reinvent the wheel? It's just fine.
Councillor Conlon. I don't know if you have to have something. Sure.
Following on from what Debbie said, if I can just give 2 examples. I came in on a by-election, so didn't have the advantage of the induction training. But I had to have training. And Andrew Pegram did face-to-face, one-to-one with me on planning. And he sat down and he said, "What is it you want to know?" And I said, "How do I know what I want to know?" Which is just the point that, in fact, Councillor Mason is making, that how do you know what the questions are you want to ask until you've actually experienced something? The other thing I'd say is, when I first became a magistrate, we had 2-day residential training. They stopped that. I think that was cost, not anything else. And in fact, then did training in the same way as we do training in a drip feed. And I think that drip feed is, you're absolutely right, but I do think there are some technicalities that new councillors need to understand when they first join. They need to understand that, what the process is, why am I sitting here, what should I be doing, that sort of thing, but it does need a follow-up. Now I'm going to ask the question.
Councillor Shaw, the groups.
Yeah, I'm going back to the induction training. The 3 of us from East League did have a problem in that the first of those induction sessions clashed with the first meeting of the new council, the East League Vice Council, and all 3 of us are Vice Councillors as well. So we actually missed the first hour of that meeting, but because we could come along, because we needed our iPads sorting out, we could at least ask questions to find out what have we missed, what do we need to know, what we missed. I joined the council expecting that to be a heavy induction, and I would have been very surprised if there wasn't. So I'm not mad about that. And Saturdays, even at my grade age, Saturdays are still valid. So I won't want to spend.
I think it's going to be difficult to please everybody, and because we never know what the next thing will be like. Councillor Phil.
Thank you. I think it would depend on how many new councillors we're going to have. You know, if we're sort of 50% new councillors, then you might see the training differently. You need to sort of get as many people together and force feed it to them over 2 days. You know, if there's only half a dozen new councillors, then it might be easier to accommodate them. I think the other thing about the training, I remember I was first elected in 2015, and it was, you know, we came down on the Thursday, and then the training started a couple of days later, or whatever it was, and it was literally every other day, and it was heavy going, but there was an awful lot of engagement because of Dan, and I can't remember his surname, Swain. He was so funny and had a story about everything and really engaged you and got the best out of people, where some other people doing the training, and it was very sort of, oh, I'm not enough, I'm just anybody noticed, you know. So I think it's all about getting the right amount of engagement from the presenters to really involve people. And going back to the scrutiny training we had, I thought that was brilliant, and especially the breakaway groups, because it meant sort of 5 or 6 people could really engage with the training, where if it's an open sort of forum and everybody's there, you get the same people speaking all the time. And those people, other people who don't speak so much normally, don't raise their hand and don't ask questions. So those smaller groups really did work. So a little bit of that, a little bit of face to face, you know, maybe intense sort of couple of days. All depends on how many new councillors we've got, I think.
I mean, is that a thing we can look at? I mean, I appreciate we have to sort of plan all this well in advance, and we're not going to know how many new councillors there are. But I think it would be good to sort of, we could have those dates in the diary as an intensive course, and then have other dates down the line as well. I think we have to do that. I just to reiterate, I think the idea of having milestones by which people must have completed training, just to make sure people are doing it, and forgetting the committee chairs to keep saying, right, you need to do this training, you need to do this training, every training. Any other comments from you? Have you got enough out of us for this?
I've got lots of notes, thank you very much.
Okay. Right, if people have got no more comments, we've been discussing this for quite a while. Thank you very much for your insight and comments into this. Some ideas for things that we can do now and for the future as well. So the recommendation is to discuss the information provided by officers, registered councillors and government, which we've done. Suggest ideas or actions related to learning development which address concerns raised by officers, which I think we've done. I think we've made specific comments related to the scrutiny group as well. What should we have done with that? So, people happy to agree with recommendations? Sure. Okay, thank you very much. So we have checked on the legal names, reduced it to minuscule print, didn't help at all. East Midlands Councillor Development Chart.
Final one for this evening then is something we discussed very briefly last April. So at the tail end of 2020, East Midlands Councils relaunched their member development charter. And something I know Councillor Mason was involved in the first time round, the first iteration. When we discussed this last April, what I proposed was not that we try our best to qualify for the car charter or chase the magic label badge or whatever it might be, but to use the self-assessment tool to look at what we're doing and decide whether or not there is anything else in there that we'd like to do by our own choice. And I said that I would bring you back an assessment of where we are now and what we're doing against the charter, so you could see where the gaps were and how much of it we met. So, like I said, not with the intention of going for the charter, but surely as a way of checking that we are following best practice and doing everything that we can to encourage member development here at Rushcliffe.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's always useful to sort of see what the authority is doing and sort of learn from that. Even if we don't take completely involved, we can make the best use of what they're doing. Comments or feedback on that? Councillor Mason.
Well, I think it's always useful to look at what you've done and what you could do better. And is it necessary to change and to add things and to do things? And I think we got the goal many years ago. And so whether that still counts, I don't think so. But the Charter Plus is interesting, but we could do it ourselves. And I think it's quite like the idea of the self-assessment and just looking more closely at that. So, yes, and that the recommendation is to discuss the findings, isn't it? And make any additional observations. So, yes, it's all very good and very worthy anyway, what comes out of these. So are there any things that you think we need to do that we're doing?
Don't think there are any things that we are doing at the moment that we need to do. I know that when we were going for charter status for, and it's on here again, there was a requirement for all incoming councillors to have a personal development plan, and that involved sitting down with a HR consultant and then following up with lots of very individual training and such like. It really didn't go down well with councillors. It really didn't go down well at all. And so from that experience, it's one of the things that, whilst it's still in the charter, I would say you're making a huge rod for your own back if you go down that. But actually, despite everything we've said this evening about training, our councillors are engaged, they are doing certain things, we'd like them to be doing more, but I don't think we need to hit them with a personal development plan the moment they walk through the door, on top of our 2 days of induction training and 6 weeks of triple feed and all of that kind of stuff. So there are things in the charter that I don't think we need to do. At the end of the day, we're a small district council. We've got very engaged councillors, both with the council and with their communities. You don't get a huge allowance. This isn't your main job. We accept all of those things and we work with what we've got. We're pragmatic about this. I don't think that going for the charter status is something that we want to do, but that is your decision. But I have highlighted where I feel we are hitting things. For example, having this group, cross-party group, meets on a regular basis, discusses training. Okay, we hit that one. Some of the others we don't hit, and I've raised questions whether or not you feel that you want to, as the document goes on.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think that we should do, because sometimes we don't always sound so, we don't realise the things that we have got that we're quite good at. You know, I came in as a hairdresser, for goodness sake, but I could talk to people. I've got certain skills that really I hadn't considered when I said I wanted to become a councillor. And so I think that sometimes just a short interview, if you like, just to talk to somebody who knows what they're doing and the questions that they're asking, could then identify some of the training that will be needed. So no, don't do the whole charter thing and the self-assessment. But sometimes, you know, it could be interesting just knowing what people can do. Not particularly what they're good at or what they can't. More of just a short chat. Perhaps it's something that the parties and the groups could find interesting on now.
Yeah. Well, please have a group meeting about this. I personally, I'm not convinced that we should be going for the child, but I think there are elements in here that we've been discussing this evening already that are in here that we can pick up, and you know, having a more structured approach to trying to get councillors through all the various courses is something that we can pick up, and we can take the ideas that, you know, as far as they fall, use those as well. Councillor Conway.
I was just following on really from what Councillor Mason just said. I understand what she's trying to say, but I think to put somebody in an interview situation, you're not going to get, they're going to actually clam up.
Yeah.
They probably need to just give a brief summary of what I've done with my life.
Yes, I suppose that's what I meant. I did. I spoke to. I was asked to speak to somebody from Rockstone who was having some difficulties with the training program, and we we sat and just talked for an hour. And she found it really quite helpful that I said, but you're already doing that. You know, and she just, it's not for everybody. I don't say it's there for every councillor, but it could be something that's offered to somebody who comes with absolutely no experience, and let's face it, they do. Especially when it's a bit tight for groups getting somebody to stand in certain area or something. You know, I'm not saying that we do, everybody does here. So, you know, sometimes it's it can be an interesting process. But she went back and gave her the house.
I think to go to the charter, I think we seem to be, although I'm not sure we are, struggling with training in some communities with. So to actually start saying that we're going to go down the route of the charter, I think that's too much. Stick with what we've got and what we're good at.
And prove whether or not certainly. Councillors.
Thank you. It may be in a year's time that we do consider going for it, because I'm thinking at this moment in time, we've got less than a year, well, just over the next elections. You've probably got a lot of people on here who have not got a good record, who are thinking of not standing again, so not going to bother doing the training. And I think, you know, if we look to start 2023, when we know who we've got, get all the training done, we've got people who know they're in the position for 4 years, I think we'll have a lot better outcome than we've had in this previous 4 years. And also because we had COVID, you know, a year in, less than a year in, we got COVID. The whole sort of term has been sort of messed up, turned on its head really. So I think, you know, look for May 2023 and you know, go for it, why not?
Thank you. I think one of the things that COVID has stopped, and we should really consider and perhaps more is peer support and helping, you know, experienced councillors doing one-to-ones and things like that with less experienced councillors. We didn't do that, but you know, with the opportunity with Teams and with Zoom, there is probably a lot more opportunity to just sit down with new councillors and have a chat, so almost like a one-to-one. Doesn't have to be hugely formal. Just say, how's it going? How's the training going? What are you struggling with? I don't understand why I'm doing this particular watch training. Oh, well, that's because that fits with this particular course. That's planning. You need to know that because that's to do with how audit, and we need to find that when budget council comes along. So you don't need to know it yet, but it's important to do training by this particular date. So I think there's the opportunity for doing, and it's not something that we've done particularly well in the past, but I think it's an element that we can use. So like that peer mentoring. I don't always like the term peer mentoring, but I think just like one-to-one chats every so often between more experienced and less experienced councillors is definitely.
I think I just agree on that. I mean, before you said the word mentoring, I think that's what came from that discussion. I think it's been mentioned around the table, that opportunity and just having I suppose a slight, a more formal way of doing that, perhaps from within the group or without having a mentoring scheme. And then for those who have been here for some time and know it all, they wouldn't go for it. You know, as a labour group, we came with separate council. It's a real thing for independence as well. You know, I think we're a bit more strict parish. So having that mentoring scheme, even though it doesn't have to possibly in our instance, I think we're doing really well. So I think that would be like it from the training point as well. Those sessions may be a way of identifying actual I think again mentioned the Western House experience with GDPR. That conversation might be a way of saying, oh, okay, on this different GDPR, I might do that for 5 months. Or you know, or everybody I do safeguarding in my work. Again, might just be a duty for my experience council to identify that, and then they've got to start on their training.
Okay. So any other comments or thoughts? I think we get the sense that we don't want to go charter, but we can put elements of this. And I think a lot of the things we're discussing with the two items, I think I picked up in as well. So are any other comments? Okay with that, okay. So the recommendation is to discuss the findings of the self-assessment, making additional observations, which we've done, decide generally which to take. We're not going to do that, we're going to pick some elements out as we've described, discussed previously. So all those in favour of the recommendation, please show. Okay, thank you, that's unanimous. I think that brings us to the end. A and B, so used to have meetings with A and B. And then somebody jumps in with an A and B. Okay, so with that, we'll close the meeting. Thank you very much.